Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point podcast. I'm Rachael Lyon, here with my co-host, John Knepher. John,
Hi,
good
Rachael.
morning. Hi. So I was just asking you if you watched Zero Day on Netflix with Robert De Niro, and it sounds like that was a resounding no, so we can't dig into it, but man, I want to know if that's actually possible. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't want to spoil
Now you're gonna make me have to go watch it.
it.
So
I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And you sometimes wonder right nowadays, right? What is so far off reality versus what is actually impending, and do they know something we don't know yet? I'll leave it at that, though. Like I said.
I'm sure there is a lot we don't know, and we will be learning about over the next probably short period of time, to be honest.
Yeah, as we talked about before, it's good to be able to compartmentalize in the cyber world, right? You just can't. Sometimes the stuff we just gotta put it over there. Put it over there. So I'm really excited for today's guest. Please welcome to the podcast, Saaim Khan. He is founder and principal advisor at Cyber Matters, which is redefining cyber consulting with an unconsult approach, which I think is super cool. He spent last two decades in cyber, and among his many certifications, he's a certified information security manager, and which I think is really cool, he has graduate certificates in cyber management, cyber law, and cyber warfare. How awesome was that? I imagine that whole process. Anyway, welcome, Saeed.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here.
Hey, Saaim. So I guess I'll kick it off here. Let's talk about the cyber shortage, which I'm sure you're very well aware of in your role. NIST reports that by this year, lack of talent and human failure will be responsible for half of significant cybersecurity incidents. Do you think that shortage exists, and how are you handling it?
Well, okay, so I think the shortage is not a shortage of skill or a shortage of talent, if I'm being honest. I think it's a shortage of experience.
Mm.
And it's, to put it in perspective, I don't know how antiquated this example is. I've been using it for a few years now. But uh, think of cybersecurity, which is a subset of engineering, which is, how old is engineering as a profession? And, within engineering, how old is information technology as a field? And then within that, how old is cybersecurity? So, I mean, you can find some really experienced IT professionals, under every rock, but it'll take time for cyber to get there. So I think the concept of there's a skills shortage, I think it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy at this stage. The way that we as an organization address it is, we work in the realm of governance, risk, and compliance, vis-a-vis the most boring of cybersecurity, as we, vehemently deny. But finding good GRC consultants is hard because you need someone who understands technology, who understands uh, in today's day and age web dev, and also understands business. So how do we find someone with that experience when A, they wouldn't want to switch employers, or B, they may be lacking that experience. So what we've kind of, and I guess this is part of unconsult, which is kind of like the genesis of everything I've learned that I don't want to do or I should not do in the last 20 years, is we look for attitudes, because knowledge can be shared, experience can be codified to a large extent, but the attitudes is what we look for. So I think the shortage is not so much of the talent, so to speak. It's really about that experience, and it's just a hazard of being a nascent industry. So there is a shortage, but there's a shortage of attitude. I've had the opportunity to interview quite a lot of people. We've recently hired a few folks to join us in the business, and during that interview process, anyone who's got any of those certifications like the ones that you introduced me with, they think that that's enough, but it's actually the attitude. And I think what that attitude needs to be is we know nothing and we need to constantly keep evolving. And we need to be able to extrapolate. So, humility and the ability to extrapolate, those are the two major attitude or the two traits that we look for. So, how quickly can you start riffing with the client and understand their business? And how humble are you that you may have to unlearn a little bit so that you can learn what the problem is? So I
Right.
think that's the approach, and that's our way to answer the shortage, the so-called shortage.
So when you're thinking about, because I think a lot about, the next generation coming up in cybersecurity and how they can navigate, kind of joining the industry, contributing in the industry. There's a couple questions that seem to come up. One, what is the value of a degree versus experience, kind of as you're talking about? But then within that experience, is there a lot of value in becoming a very niche player or being, more of a generalist? And is that something you're looking for? Maybe a generalist that you can then train up in a niche area and train them the way that you want to. But I'd be curious of your perspective there.
Okay, can I ask you a question before I answer yours?
Okay. Okay.
So if you were to weigh a generalist and a specialist, who would you think is the more experienced person?
Let's see, Rachel, if you and I have the same opinion.
uh, I would go with the specialist myself. It's generally you start as a generalist, right? And then you narrow down your specialty.
Respectfully, I disagree with that
Do
definition.
you? Okay.
Okay, like think about it this way. So you know how the penultimate office bearer in an organization usually has the hyphen general appended to their title. So you've
Mhm.
got attorney general,
Okay.
director general, right? So generalization does not mean that I'm a jack of all. Generalization, in my opinion,
Mhm.
opinion is the emphasis here, is someone who has seen so much that they have now a very deep understanding of the general view.
Got you.
So a
Okay.
generalist, like for example, I've been in IT for about, a little over 20 years. I've been in cyber for about 15. I am only just starting to feel that I could potentially call myself a generalist because
Okay.
I have worked with so many different clients, so many different industries, in so many different situations that now the culmination of that, and by the way, I only work predominantly in GRC and DevOps. Those
Mhm.
are the two areas that I work in. So, yes, I'm a specialist in those areas by some definition, but
Mhm.
the what I'm aiming towards is becoming a generalist. So, when you say that there are more generalists, actually no, there are no generalists. They're just specialists who are really at the
Got you.
beginning of their career. Uh,
Okay.
that's how I look at it.
Mhm.
So, in terms of the new generation coming up, I think uh, history is circular, like time is circular, life is
Mhm.
circular. It's almost kind of going back to the 30s, the 1930s style, let's just build it up, right? So, the post-depression, the FDR thing of let's build it up, right? So I
Mhm.
think we're kind of at that stage again, where we need to start building up that generation by giving them, that good work ethic again, by giving them all of those things about, there are no shortcuts. Um,
Right.
and the where we find ourselves at the intersection of shorter attention spans, generative AI, and similar technologies, and a continuously changing geopolitical techno landscape, we are literally starting from zero.
Mhm.
So I think that's really what the next generation needs to go back to the basics of, and at the risk of sounding fuddy-duddy, working hard, showing up on time, being consistent. Those are the things that the next generation, needs to kind of work on because the technology is now kind of becoming easier to get a grasp on.
Right.
So, I mean, that's once again perhaps a bit opinionated, but that's what I think.
And I like your position on generalist versus
Mhm.
specialist as well. I think, in my experience, right, dealing with security things as well as operational things and GRC in particular, it's always been very good to have, folks who understand not only the specifics of the security threat, but how to handle it. And that's a very generalist skill. Um, so, you mentioned going back to the basics, but also like what are kind of the broader requirements that you think are needed in the space, and how do we make sure that there isn't really a talent gap there, and that industry is basically bringing people up with more of this generalist aspiration, if you will.
Okay. I think those basic skills would be to understand core technology concepts as of 2025, not of um, you know 2000. And this is where I feel academic institutions really need to up their game. And it's almost like a trickle down effect, right? You'll have the top tier universities kind of refresh their curriculum, and then maybe 3 to 5 years down, then the mid level universities will start kind of taking that, and then 5 years after that, the base tier universities or the base tier educational institutes will do that. However, the grasp of technology needs to be as follows. We are working towards having a completely decentralized infrastructure. We are working towards personalized technology. We're working towards things being based on metadata, things being based on hyper personalization. That is the future of technology. Whether you want to go down the path or the rabbit hole, in my opinion, of agentic AI or whatever, that's irrelevant. Whatever that is, it is really pursuit of hyper personalization. So the skill set that the new generation needs to come equipped with is an understanding of that. The second thing, which is both a boon and a curse in my opinion, is truly understanding how the world is grappling with short-term gratification, and that is most prevalent in technology. So understand that people are not getting dumber. People are actually looking for the TLDR of the TLDR of the TLDR. So understanding that we need to communicate very quickly. And and this sounds almost counterintuitive. How do you get the message across, because we are bombarded with stimuli from all directions? So case in point, and I'm going to go into a very specific technology discussion here. When you talk about security operations centers, in today's context, there are billions of events being recorded, and you're getting notification upon notification upon notification, and you have notification fatigue. Then you have all these next generation SIEM tools which says we will cut the noise. Well, they're cutting the noise, but then you're adding complexity because now you're getting a different category of notifications, but then fatigue isn't going down. So the next generation, the talent that comes in, needs to start thinking about how do we cut through the noise, and that kind of goes back to that comment I made on our previous discussion point about going back to basics. And at the risk of sounding vague, that is kind of like where it is unfortunately a point where we find ourselves at, where you do need to have new entrants to the industry being able to understand that, look, I need to get these things right, everything else is going to happen. And then to your point, Jonathan, about aspirations to becoming a generalist, I believe every new entrant to the workplace is still filled with hope. So when you're filled with hope, if you can nurture that in an environment which allows multiple experiences whilst kind of reining in the short-term gratification aspect, then I think people won't get distracted. It's a balancing act. I don't think anyone can get it right 100% of the time, where we want to offer our staff multiple opportunities, but then we also don't want to inundate them with so much choice that they kind of like, I don't feel like doing this anymore. But wait, you're in the middle of a project. Yeah, but I'm not feeling it. Right? That
Yeah,
that sounds
yeah,
very familiar of the newer generation.
exactly. There's definitely a balancing act of giving people the opportunity to take the tour versus, focus and get the work done, right?
One more thing I'll say on this is one thing that I also suffered at different points in my career till the point I made the decision to start my own firm, is there is actually a dearth of mentorship available. I mean, people can claim to be mentors, but like a genuine mentor who can actually come and help you build a path, that is not very, very common. I've had perhaps two individuals I can think of that immediately come in my head, like, their names come in my head, who actually sat me down and actually talked to me about, what do you want to do? Or do you have a general direction of where you want to go? Okay, now these are the things you need to do. So, that is really important. And that's a point that should resonate with someone, regardless of whether you are Gen Alpha, Gen Z, Gen X, or a millennial, or a zillennial, or whatever, right? Whatever the anthropologists are calling those terms, but that is clearly missing, and which is why so many people feel a bit lost, if you will, and that's why there's such a huge surge in personal coaching businesses these days.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah.
I think that's key too. Like I have seen that where there's people just haven't thought about where they want to go and what's their direction, and I think it's very important to set a goal, even if it's not the goal you end up going for, but just to have a vision.
Yeah, I mean, also we don't have any like, we don't have any tech idols to kind of think about beyond the run of the mill Jobs and Musk and, you know maybe a few names. But like, for example, I mean, I'm sure if I asked you, Jonathan, or if I asked you, Rachel, you can at least name 10 people who are like rock stars, and a lot of people listening to this wouldn't know them. Like, for example, people love Wozniak, but when you ask them, why do you love Wozniak? Oh, he founded Apple. It's like, nah, that's not why.
Yeah.
Wozniak is the tech genius, right? Right. He's really, like, like the amount of technological innovations he's done, the amount of patents he has. That's why he's the rock star, not just because he's like the chubbier of the two and the cuter of the two, right? That's not the reason. A lot of people, don't even give, Tim Berners-Lee credit, right? And these are names like, I mean, ask any 25-year-old about that, and they'll be like, who? Right?
Yep.
So we don't have those characters. Like, who we have now are just, unfortunately, and not to throw shade on anyone, you just have people who've got incredible pull with social media influence. That's what's missing. That's why you don't really have good mentors. Like, everyone's saying, hey, this happens, and I post this and I post that, and then, you know what, the fifth post will be, hey, guess what, I've just started my own private coaching business. If you sign up with me now for $10 a month, you're going to get one-on-one coaching from me, or you're going to get access to my private blogs. Really, that's not really setting anyone up for success, but I digress.
I love it. But it's so true. The whole influencer thing, I mean, you're 100% right. And, you look at kind of these stalwart, publications, right? Like a Washington Post, or, a lot of these other places are looking at influencers as reporters. And so a lot of it starts becoming kind of this perceived reality through a particular lens, right? So it's like, how do you navigate in that environment, right? Because, unless you're going to put in the effort, I think, to, I like when I read something on TikTok, because I love TikTok, before I'm like accept it as truth, I go look at several different sources, that I trust, and try to get a barometer of, like, how accurate is this information? Like, the report when Gene Hackman died, I was like, did he really though? Let me go double check this out and see if it's being validated elsewhere, just as an example. But a lot of people don't. It takes time to do that, and I think that's a really good point, right? And yeah, what does that do for the future, and how does that shape us? I think that's a very fascinating question.
And it's also like, I think one phrase you used kind of sums up that, because that's probably that's the poisonous cherry on top of the cake, right? Which is perceived reality. Now, when you take short-term gratification or immediate gratification, you take easy access to a multitude of sources. Let's not even go into veracity of those sources. And then you take perceived reality, because you've got perception, you've got echo chamber, and you've got the ability to generate content at scale. So, using tools which now can take your likeness. I mean, we're experimenting with a couple of things internally, and we were looking at, do we, for example, one of the things I want to do is I want to be able to go and talk about hard topics. How realistic is it to run a business, deliver consulting work, and also then sit in front of camera and then produce content? So we explored the idea of generative AI. It was so scary we stopped because there's no veracity in that. And I mean, sat in front of a camera for 5 minutes, or I think it was like 8-minute video, uploaded it, and then suddenly I've got a likeness and I can just make it say anything I want.
Right,
But
right.
now imagine someone who is pumping out content upon content without checking it, because and I think at some point we will get into the Ouroboros nature of the whole
Right.
thing. Um, it's just like more, filler upon filler upon filler, and there's no substance. So going back to how we got here with that whole mentorship thing, experiences come from being allowed to fail, being given a bit of a plan, deviating from the plan, arriving at some destination where you have no idea, and then learning. How much are we doing that? How much of that are we doing? Not really. I mean, everyone's given this little narrow thing that, yeah, just do this. And then, they don't really have that depth of experience. Sorry to kind of, I guess, ramble, but I'll
No.
give you an example of this, right? Just before COVID hit, there was a workshop I was invited to, and they had some like really young, vibrant people sitting on the panel with me, and we were talking about some challenges in cybersecurity, and a member of the audience asked a question about uh, how does one respond to an incident around a data breach, because it was a pretty topical thing at the time. There was some high profile breach that happened in Australia at the time. Of the five of us, four spoke at length, and I'm talking about 15-minute monologues,
Mhm.
but without any substance.
Mm.
And it was almost like, and then that question came up again, and then the moderator was like, well, Simon, what do you think? And I immediately said, well, with the incident, do you want to save your job? Do you want to save the company? Do you want to look good? What's the core
Right.
goal, right? I can give you an example from each. And immediately that shifted the conversation. And I think I probably spoke for about 6, 7 minutes on like they wanted to know, how do we save the company without,
Mhm.
doing that. So I talked about over communicating, under communicating, the non-technical aspects of incident response. But the dearth of experience with the other people, and by the way, all of these four are like so-called household names in terms
Mhm.
of those, I guess they were influencers version one. We don't have like people having these good conversations. I saw this thing the other day on LinkedIn, GRC thought leadership as a pie chart. There are these two guys. So I don't know if you've heard of this gentleman called Troy Fine. He works a lot in the GRC space. He's an auditor, and he posts a lot of memes, poking fun at SOC 2, and how SOC 2 is kind of being overused. And then there's this young guy who works as a DevOps GRC engineer called Ayub Fandi, and he posts a lot of these hard-hitting points. So GRC thought leadership, if you're on LinkedIn, is 49% Troy Fine memes, and 49% Ayub Fandi posts, and then that little sliver, that's the rest of us.
That's
I'm writing.
interesting.
I'm writing this down.
So I'm thinking, you brought up the Ouroboros problem. I want to take a look at that from kind of the standpoint of AI and kind of what you were
Mm.
talking with earlier on, like the lack of experience, right? If you think about that, how does AI kind of both enhance security, but also like it's going to introduce new vulnerabilities as well. And that kind of feels like a loop here of attack and defense and expertise and synthetic information. How do you leverage this for the right things in a positive manner and hopefully break that cycle?
Okay. So, you talked about vulnerabilities, right? And how it could enhance or deter security. Let's look at it from two perspectives, a non-technical and a technical perspective. And we'll go with the non-technical first. Now, let's suppose you're a mid-level consultant or a mid-level security practitioner, and you've been asked to prepare a briefing on the impact that a new legislation has on the company. Now, traditionally you would go look up, you'd go to the government website, you download a copy of that legislation, you'd either print it out or put it on some easy reference media for yourself, and you'd read through it and you start thinking about it. What would this mean for us? What would this mean for us? And you make your notes, and then you do your analysis and things like that. Now you basically open up your LLM of choice, enable web search, and say, what would the impact of this legislation be on a company that produces widgets? And that is gospel. Then you take that, you regurgitate it, and wow, amazing, you were able to turn around this research in such a small amount of time. You're doing really good. That guy gets it. He is really leveraging the power of AI. Except 3 months down the line, you used that analysis to make a financial decision, and the CFO takes a look at the numbers and he's like, hold up, why are we spending so much on this again? And then it turns out that half the information that you posted was hallucinated by the AI, and you've been kind of doing a lot of garbage out. Therefore, there's just a lot of garbage going around. That's the non-technical side. We don't tend to fact check, and even if new AI tools add that little footnote saying this is the source of this information, the inference is not something you can rely on. From a technical side, I'm going to take you on a slight story time, and I think you guys might realize that you might not want me on again because I like to tell a lot of stories.
Give us the story. We
Love
like it.
So you would have seen this huge surge in these AI assisted code generation tools, like Vercel's got one. They're like, everyone's got one now, and the concept is amazing, right? Build me an app, because that's what all the demos show you, right? Build me an app which is a to-do list, which is internet connected and blah blah blah, and then suddenly just generate a piece of code. You're like, wow, that's amazing, I should get on top of that right away. And you start coding. Or you have all of these different repo platforms that provide some kind of a co-pilot that helps you co-create code, right? What people aren't talking about is the fact that yes, it can build the code, but it's not been optimized to do it in the most efficient fashion. And what happens is when you start building these codes, like and by the way, this insight I wish I could take credit for it. I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a CTO, fractional CTO, and he's like, this is great for me because all these founders and all these business owners go and use these tools to build out version 1 of their software. Then the MVP or the prototype works great, but then when they start bringing it into production and when they start getting clients and they do security testing, they realize it's such bloated code and it's impossible to fix, it's impossible to change, and then they got to go back and rewrite it and actually at this time bring in a human to build it out for them. So that's introducing vulnerabilities and extra complexity, all in the name of, hey, we're just building it out. I mean, I recently read that one of the larger, well-known AI brands is now bringing out agentic AI offerings where you can get a developer for about $3,000 or $2,000 a month. But that developer is going to be building, that so-called AI developer is going to be building code that's not particularly efficient. Yes, it'll do the job, but it's not really going to be efficient, and it'll introduce vulnerabilities. And the other thing also is we've also internally in the company tested some AI-powered pen testing tools. The POCs are really nice to watch, but in reality, we got a vulnerable app from a client and we got permission from them to use the AI tool and then obviously have one of our testers do it. The AI found 35 vulnerabilities. The pen tester found 7. Those 35 vulnerabilities that the AI found, look, the numbers might slightly be off, but it's like a factor of 5. The AI found vulnerabilities were like really small things, like what you would get akin to like running a vuln scan. Each one of the vulnerabilities that the pen tester found would potentially have some kind of data exfil scenario happening. or some kind of authorization bypass. So, what's the value? And AI does cost, I mean, like, it's not free. It does cost money. And, I don't think you're getting your bang for buck. So now with the Ouroboros problem, right? You mentioned like so, for someone who's not aware, Ouroboros is a methodological reference to a snake eating its own tail. Right? So what does, why do I call it Ouroboros problem? Well, once again, I wish I could take the claim for it. I think I read it in uh, the New Yorker, or it was one of those. Um, Basically, the idea is if you wanted to build out marketing copy, you'd build out marketing copy using AI, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and then you'd publish it. Then someone else in a similar industry to you would want to build marketing copy. And that AI engine is trained on parsing the entire web and then finding the best copies, or the best version of copy, or like generate the best copy possible. But a lot of its data over time is just going to be AI generated
Mm-hmm.
content. So using AI generated content to generate more AI generated content to generate more content by AI, and as a consequence, it's just regurgitating the same thing, and the overall quality comes down. This is another issue that happens with AI tools where I don't know if you've personally experienced it, but any of these new models that get released by these AI companies, you use it for about 6 months and then it just like becomes useless for some reason. So there's like some level of plateauing that happens. So that's what's happening at scale now. Sorry, very long-winded answer, Jonathan. But once again, I mean, I do like to tell stories.
I
No,
love it.
great answer.
It is a great answer because it does kind of get at the heart of, AI. I think, there's been a lot of trying to position it as the silver bullet, right? And particularly in using it for automation and security. And but there's so much care and feeding, right? I mean, as you know, nothing in cyber is a one and done it, right? There's like set it and forget it, whatever phrase you want to use. And as more people are, companies are leaning into this, right, for threat detection, incident response, or whatever. I mean, what is a path forward, right? So that you are getting the need to know information versus, to your point, getting flooded with, these results that, okay, 80% of those actually aren't critical to my business at this point in time. I need to know where I need to pinpoint my focus, which is what the hope of that AI response would be. So, I mean, what does the care and feeding look like, and how do you make that manageable?
I think with AI as well, you need to understand. I mean, in addition to being a pedantic storyteller, I'm also a simpleton who tries to, uh, create analogies which would make sense in the real world. This is how I think AI is if AI was a person. An AI, a generative AI, GPT, whatever you want to call it, is effectively, in my opinion, if you make an analogy, a 7-year-old child who has superhero or super human level intellect and capability,
Mm-hmm.
right? And but it's still got the psyche of a 7-year-old. And what do 7-year-old children want to do to the adults? They want to please the adults. They want the
Mm-hmm.
adults to be happy with them, even if it means making up stuff. And that's what AI does. It just
I
wants
like
you to be
that.
happy, right? Because its goal is to get to the answer. If it gets to the answer through a hallucinatory or a hallucinated track, sure, doesn't matter because it's getting to the goal.
Right.
As a practitioner of cybersecurity or technology in general, or in a corporate setting, when you're using these tools, oh, okay, that was interesting. I don't think my AI powered camera liked what I said. um, there we go. I think with there's a lot of care required into actually accepting data. So when you are, if you're expecting the AI tool to be able to generate content which is new insight, you are setting an unrealistic expectation. It is not going to give you a new insight. It will only regurgitate what it knows, perhaps bring a thing you didn't think about. But these are things that people who use these systems on a day-to-day basis need to think about. Also, at this stage, in my opinion, it's absolutely terrible at doing data analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I still use regex and Python for a lot of data analysis. I find that works very reliably. And if there's an issue, it's probably because I coded it wrong. So those are the things, Rachel, that you'd want to be mindful of when using these things. Streamlining cybersecurity operations. I don't think we're there yet, because let's take security operations centers. You can use AI to infer a lot of things. So if you, for example, one use case I do think makes sense is in the threat intelligence space. And I'm saying this off the back of a lot of experiments that we've done at Cyber Matters over the last, like to say, 14 months, where we've taken a lot of open source intelligence feeds, tagged them, but using regex, not using AI, and then used those well-formed pieces of intel, fed into an LLM, and then asked it to kind of give us a good summary, which is human readable. So almost like an intelligence report.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that 6 times out of 10, or 6 times out of 10, we've gotten a very good result. Where when we gave it to CTOs and CISOs to read, they're like, "Yep, this is great. I wouldn't mind reading this as part of my morning email stack because it's giving me the right information, it's giving me the right level of detail." But it took us about 14 months to fine tune it to the point where it made sense. So that is where, that's kind of like goes with the territory. Can I rely on it 100%? Absolutely not. So whenever we do those emails, the night before we send them out, we'll have one of the team take a look at the content. Well, usually it's me. Take a look at that content before it goes out, because we don't want a situation where we're kind of hyping something, or we're kind of downplaying something, which could potentially be the difference between a missed indicator of attack or an indicator of compromise versus something that was just filler.
I know, Jonathan, you've got so many questions here. I can see it on your face.
Which direction do you want to go?
Well, I mean, you brought up some, like, a lot of kind of points around like how to use it. I think, and you had a story about it falling short as well. Do you have more examples you want to share? I know you like telling the stories here, so
Sure.
are there other good stories where it's fallen short on things?
Well, I think that's probably like if I can probably count on my fingers the times I got it right. I've lost count the time. Like for example, when OpenAI came out with their paid models where they guaranteed sandboxed environments for your team to kind of run, your GPT, we kind of played with it for a little while, and then we kind of decided to step away from it, and we then went back to basics of good old regex and good old automation, where we could, kind of just like get through things quickly. We'll use AI where we can, like, if you're in a hurry and you just want to get a quick answer. And now Google's enabled AI mode, so I mean, I don't think I think we'll just stick with that. But things where it's failed, feed it some anonymized risk data and ask it to give you trends. It started talking about things that were nowhere in the data set. For example, we fed it risks around predominantly software development, technology integration, and SaaS vendor reliability. Those were the general themes of the risks, and I was hoping to get something like that, but instead we got things like, I'm trying to think of something that was probably, like, without giving too much detail away. We got stuff along the lines of staff shortages, acts of terror, force majeure, because it was going off some generic risk set probably that it's been trained on, and it just completely started like hallucinating, and it kind of just took a good story and then just ran with it, right? That's one. Another example that, and look, this is almost like try this at home or something, which is, let's suppose you prompt your LLM to output a certain response. What you'll notice is, let's say you ask it to respond to 5 inputs that you give. The first two are going to be phenomenal. And you will kind of start getting this nice feeling that, you know what, maybe this will make my life easy. Maybe I can actually get some extra time when I get some time back. The third response is going to be slightly shorter. And then the fifth and subsequent responses, so not just the fifth, not just the sixth, but every single response after that in that particular chat session is going to be truncated, and it's not going to be as good as the first. Because what it's doing is, with every iteration, it is finding the most efficient way to respond to your query at the cost of quality. And that's what it will do, because now, in its own way, it's found the most efficient way to traverse between your input queries, map it against its vector databases, come up with a particular answer, and then just optimize it. So then it'll just keep going back to that, and you'll have to kind of, like, it's almost like smacking on the side of the head and saying, hey, get back to work properly and, like, do this right. And then you'll have to, like, go back again. A lot of people don't realize this stuff takes time. So you'll have to then go back, you have to prompt it again, you got to feed it again, and then you'll kind of, so it'll time yourself and then try doing that task manually, and you'll probably find you're like same time. It's just the perception, going back to that comment Rachel made earlier, it's that perception that I'm actually doing it faster. You're not. You're actually spending more time prompting and like, oh, no, it's not. I actually want it like this, right? And you're like, yeah, you think you're having a conversation with a real person, but you're not.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. But like, I have a question for you guys, because obviously you speak to such a diverse group of people. What do you think is the general consensus around AI finding its way into cybersecurity?
I think we've been hearing basically what you're saying. Like the power of the AI is to augment people who are already experts, right? Like you can't give an AI tool to someone who's super junior, because they won't know
Right.
if the output is valid or not. And similar to your trick, I tell people when they're learning AI, ask it things you intimately and in depth know the answers to, so that you understand kind of where this hallucination happens or where it doesn't. And so the same thing from the threat space, right? It's as long as you have an expert who's using it, it's probably advantageous for them, but not for people who don't already know. It's not going to magically give them experience and depth, when the risks there are of not only like the prompt side of it, but the hallucination bits as well, right? Like if you can't look at the output and know, like, oh yeah, that is valid or not, then it's kind of not real useful.
I would agree. Rachel, what about you? Have you seen similar kind of viewpoints come across?
100%. 100%. I could see the trap too, right? To Jonathan's point, because when I love Gen AI and things like that for like ideation, but like you, I've been in the industry, I've been in technology, right, 25 years now. So I know, I kind of integrally know nuanced things, and it's really fascinating to see what it comes back with. I'm like, well, that's patently false. And a lot of times they don't have the source. I'm like, I inherently don't trust what I'm getting back. I'm like, well, that's an interesting perspective. I don't think I'm going to use it this time. But it's very dangerous, because if you don't know those nuanced differences, to your point, you can make some very large mistakes, particularly if you're building business decisions around what that output is. But it's a tough one. I mean, it can be a great learning tool, I think, in a lot of ways. But again, you have to know how to navigate. Okay, this is what not to do, and this is what is actually useful, and kind of how do you parse that information in a way that becomes strategic. There's I think a long way to go still.
And it's so convincing, though, that it's right.
It really is.
Like, at least with a human, you can be like, oh, they're feeding me a line, or they don't really know this. But the AI is convincing, even when it knows
it's
not.
it's a master BS artist.
Exactly.
Right? And it just sounds so true. It's like, yeah, I think so, but hold on, no, wait a second, no, that's not correct, right? So, the side note, I actually kind of love seeing my parents use AI, because they think whatever it says is true.
That's awesome.
So, they're like, "Oh, did you know this?" I'm like, "That's not true." It's like, "No, I asked Chat GPT, and I was like, "Yeah, it's not true." "Oh, you just like, nah, you're wrong." I'm like, "All right, I'm wrong." So,
It's hard to argue with how convincing it is.
It is, but it's almost, I think, kind of bringing it back on influencers, right? And it's almost like the next generation social media, right? When you're on X or whatever, oh, well, this influencer said this is happening, it must be true. And so now you've got Gen AI aggregating those kind of points of view and just spitting them out to you in a very kind of authoritative way. Like, oh, well, if it crawled the web and came back, obviously this is the thing. So that's fascinating, right? And you kind of see how this now becomes almost an exponentially, is like an existential crisis almost, right?
it is. Well, I dare say it is almost like existential crisis as a service. Right? Also depends. Like, sorry, if you're on a paid plan, it's existential crisis. But if you're on the free plan, it's existential dread as a service, right? Because you're only gonna get to this point, and then you're not gonna get beyond, right? So,
Right.
I mean, on this thing, I have to say one of the scariest things, right? Was, this was like when they introduced voice mode on one of those apps, and they had one of those voice mods which sounded eerily like Scarlett Johansson. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I did this, and maybe it's my cognitive bias, but they got that voice model like to the point where when you're talking to the person, it's almost like a real person talking to you, right? So like for a second, you get this a bit of dissonance in your head, like, whoa, okay, is that true? No, that's not true. Because when you go back and read it, like, yeah, that's absolutely nonsense. But the voice, the
Mm-hmm.
the fact that it sounds like someone that you've probably heard thousands of times in movies and media, right? So that builds that trust, inherent, like that these are all different levels of cognitive bias, and then you're buying into that, and maybe the generation before us who believe the written word must be true, otherwise how can you publish it online or in print, kind of then goes up like, no, if it's written it must be true. Like, no, that's fake news. No, what is fake news? It's published. I'm like, yeah,
Right.
let me show you how easy it is to publish something. But yeah, I think it's time for restraint, and especially in our
Mm.
industry, I think it's time for restraint, because we're probably on the back, like we're on the excess side of abundance now with these things, right? Technological abundance is so much that we're like, I read the other day about someone trying to bring woolly mammoths back, and they've basically successfully made furry mice or something, right? Which is the first step. They got the woolly part right. Now they just need to get that mouse to become a mammoth. But and then someone posted saying, "Hey man, they're extinct. I mean, can we save the ones that are still here? Stop trying to bring extinct animals back, right?" But like, so there's such an abundance of technology. We got to start. And in the cyber world, by the way,
Right.
I mean, look, uh, so like to give you perspective of how long I've been in the field. So I know the brand from the WebSense days, right?
Okay. Yeah,
I
back in
used
the
to
day.
sell WebSense, right?
Okay.
Right? And I've sent many, and I've sold and talked about many a content filter and many a, let's call it DLP Gen 0.1, right? So I've been around. And the thing is now in 2025 we have so many acronyms, right? Like before we only had to deal with the, oh, what's next gen now, right? But that's not the case anymore. Now you've got you got EDR, MDR, XDR, MXDR, EXDR, or whatever, right? And then you've got SIEM, you've got next gen SIEM, you've got LCAAS, log correlation as a service. You've got what was it? Security lakes now, which is data lakes, just a lake of all of your log events. And like there's so much happening, and like defense in depth now looks like this weird picture that you can't even look at because it's got so many components in it. So restraint is key.
Mhm.
um, I'm gonna go back to that concept of a security onion, right? Where you got to think about your organization. And this is pretty much like, by the way, thanks to all of this explosion of abundance, a business like ours, which basically our value proposition is no BS, no fanfare, it's no frills cybersecurity consulting, and that's it. Like, we'll give you the most simplistic strategy, and it seems to resonate very well because I think everyone's like, oh, everyone's getting inundated with the fancy strategies. Ours is like, yeah, switch that off, switch this on, smack that person on the head, tell that person that they're fired, bring that person on, and there you go. And then then let's go for lunch. that's that's literally like a strategy that we've done for someone. I mean, not that simplistic, but you get the point.
Right.
Restraint is important because, by the way, from memory, the last 5 big data breaches, how were they caused? Nothing sophisticated, probably. I'd wager it's nothing sophisticated. It's simple, good old it's good old social engineering. The threats are only getting more common and increased in velocity and increased in their incidence. But the technological prowess of those attacks isn't really expanding. I mean, the last most sophisticated attack that I read about was something that was covered extensively in technology magazines about malware embedded on one of those Sun Microsystem chips. Right? That was the last major sophisticated technological data breach that I'd read about. And even that was like, well, did they, didn't they, kind of thing. So why is your cybersecurity strategy becoming so complex that it's becoming, almost unwieldy, that you can't manage it? So that's why restraint is really important, I think. But once again, this is a random person's rant, so please take it with like a pound of salt.
I wouldn't call it a rant. I love the perspective though. Because it's hard. We get so caught up, right? I mean, everything is moving so quickly, kind of to your point, and it's very difficult to take that step back and try to look at things objectively and kind of, and also take some of the sheen off things and let's get back to it's just raw base. And like, okay, this is what we're actually working with, and then you can kind of better navigate ahead. But it's difficult to make that time, for sure. We were just talking about that, Jonathan and I, before you joined, because he said, Rachel, you always seem to kind of be, kind of seeing all the things, and I'm like, well, because I make the time for these things, but I also don't make time for other things. So I love watching Netflix series, and I have to binge every new one when it comes out. It's my Achilles heel. But then there's all these other things that then get kind of pushed aside. So I think that's a great reminder. Truly, that we need to keep talking about with folks because it's very difficult to do day to day.
No, for sure. And I think just on that, like one area which I think we need to scale things back is just the explosion of vendor risk management, third-party risk management. Mm-hmm. It's like Oprah giving out questionnaires. You get a questionnaire. You get a questionnaire. Right, you get a questionnaire, right? And then one thing I actually asked one of our customers, and then I got a call from an extremely amused CISO. I asked a security analyst, I'm happy to fill out this Excel sheet for you if you promise you're going to read this from start to finish. Otherwise, I'm not going to fill it out. If you have any questions, I'm happy to jump on a 3-hour, Teams meeting and talk till the cows come home. But I'm not going to fill this document out unless you promise me you're going to read it word to word, because I'm going to leave tidbits there. I'm going to ask you if you read it.
Right.
And his CISO called and said, why are you bullying my analyst? I'm like, well, I'm bullying your analyst because he sent me a questionnaire which I know he's not going to read. I know you're not going to read it. So why are you asking these questions? For whom does this Excel sheet get filled out?
Yeah.
And he's like, no, we got to do good due diligence. And didn't you say that we have to do good due diligence? I'm like, yeah, do good due diligence, but don't send a questionnaire. Like, how do we do it then? I'm like, okay, that'll cost you.
Yeah.
Those questionnaires though were brutal. I think we've all seen them, and it's like, yeah, who is gonna read that? Yeah.
It's I don't know who's come up with this, but genius words. It's just compliance theater. It's security theater. It is. Oh, look, we asked all these questions. It's actually a story that resonates on this. So there was a fatal accident at an amusement park in Australia, and they kind of went through the motion of like proving that we did our best, like we had audits, and then this was an audit that was done, and this was the compliance we had and things like that. But then there was this one question that was asked to the inspector, which he couldn't answer, which then kind of created this big awkward moment, which is this was a roller coaster, I believe. So the question that was asked to the inspector was, did you ride the roller coaster? No, I did not. Yet you passed it. Yes, because we had these checklists we had to go through. Like, but you didn't ride the roller coaster, right? So once again, come back to what's actually important. Like, let's say I was working with Jonathan. Jonathan was a vendor of mine, and we were about to give him some data for analytics and stuff. The most important concern for me is not if he's ISO certified or if he's SOC 2 audited. What's most important is what are the data sharing agreements that we're going to have? What are the data sharing protocols we're going to have? How long is he going to have access to my data? Where is that data going to reside? I'd rather spend the conversation on that rather than, hey, Jonathan, are you ISO 27001 certified? If you are, well, good for you, but that's irrelevant to this particular use case because I really want to get into the detail on this. I'm not saying that ISO is not important. It's just about relevancy. So there's a whole camp which would slay me on this, saying that, well, you work in this industry and you're saying it's not relevant. Like, no, it is relevant, but not in this particular case. But once again, that's a whole separate thing. That will require this little coffee cup to be filled to the brim, and probably with something stronger than coffee. But anyways.
So one of the things that we love to do on this podcast, Saaim, is also get a little personal, because it's always so fascinating how people have found their way to cyber, particularly when you've been in cyber so long, but also, over that time, kind of some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned along the way. And I would love for you to share some of those insights with our listeners. I know you talked a lot about mentorship, which I agree. That is a huge, huge need, but I'd be interested in kind of more broadly as well, kind of some observations over the last 20 years for our listeners.
Okay. I think the most important lesson that I've learned is to be able to quickly get to the heart of the matter. And I know it sounds very generic and very vague, but I'll give you a little bit of an example. If I walk into an incident crisis room, the heart of the matter is something has happened and it has been dealt with, but what is the fallout? And you have to be able to determine the fallout from a variety of angles. If I walk into a testing scenario, the bottom line is the application worthy to be published online? So getting to the heart of the matter, that's probably the biggest thing. And in terms of the fact that this is an industry that's continuously changing, the other valuable lesson is you are not an expert. You're just a season pass holder. So stop calling yourself an expert. Stop, I mean, I've been in this industry for a long time, but I still don't know jack. Right? And I have to remind myself because complacency is very easy and it can happen very quickly. So I have spent the last couple of days reading up some new legislation that's come out and what it means from a cybersecurity perspective. Do I like doing it? Actually, I do. I do like reading legislative instruments, but that's me. I mean, some people like I get bullied by my wife on this, like, oh, why do you like these things? Like like so boring. I was like, yeah, but hey, that's what I like.
Right.
And then like you with your Netflix, my guilty pleasure is reading sci-fi. So, but yeah, I mean, look, so the two things that I guess I could say in the last 20 odd years is learn to get to the heart of the matter and understand that you have to unlearn in order to understand. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess those are the two lessons. I mean, otherwise, general advice, be a good person, or rather, more specifically, don't be a douchebag. Uh, be kind, um, and don't don't you know communicate like use clear communication,
Mm-hmm.
and don't be afraid of having awkward conversations, because it's only awkward for the conversation, then it's fine. But if you don't have the awkward conversation, you will have an awkward situation, which is worse.
It's someone had said something once, and I like it. I think that's what you're characterizing here. It's almost like get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And kind of to your point, right? That's how you learn as well. It's when you go into the unknown and you're consistently learning, and that's what Jonathan and I have talked about as well on the podcast. Just I can't think of another industry, and perhaps there are, but I love cyber for that. Every day you learn something new, and it's kind of daunting, because okay, I got to wrap my head around this emerging concept, but I can't think of another place I'd rather be to be challenged like that, every single day. And maybe other industries are like that, but I just haven't found one like cyber that does
No,
gives you the juice like that. Yeah.
100%. But word to the wise, there are many a rabbit hole in this industry that if you're not comfortable going down, then you very well should not. In 2013, I got into cybercrime monitoring, and that led me down some really dark paths, which I never ever want to go down again.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you know, right?
Yeah.
So, this is also an industry which will offer you all of that in an area which you can continue going down without going down something you don't want to either.
Right.
So, I picked GRC, and then I went down GRC to the point where, I'm going head to head with lawyers now. Arguing over interpretation of legislative things, because that's where I've found something interesting. But yeah, this is a great industry to be in, and I guess my own journey has been, I'm a third culture kid, double immigrant, and I have built a business from nothing. So all of those things are quite uncomfortable. So that's kind of like the norm now.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Saaim, I want to be mindful of time. This has been so much fun. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the insights. And to all of our listeners out there, thanks for joining us again this week for another awesome guest. And as always, I'm going to drum roll. Jonathan, what do we like our
Smash that subscribe button.
Yes. I think of like the big fist. Oh, but don't break your computer in the process. So to everyone out there, again, thanks for joining us, and thanks for joining Saaim Khan, a founder of Cyber Matters, our amazing guest this week. And until next time, stay safe.